It is my great pleasure to be welcoming you, Bheki Mahlobo, to the Free Market Foundation offices here at Northwood's House. You and I are former colleagues. We were both at the Center for Risk Analysis at the Institute of Race Relations once upon a time. And today you are off studying abroad in the United States of America. What are you up to there, Bheki, just for the benefit of our audience?
Thank you for having me on, David. I'm pursuing my master's in economics there overseas. I've been 1 year in and I'm going there again like next week actually for another year. What interested me in studying abroad was actually, I wanted to have a deeper understanding of how the world works. It's like a very broad term, but basically I was interested in how policy impacts the daily lives of ordinary people, be it here in South Africa or be it there in the US. And what pushed me to go study abroad was that I wanted to see how life is like in a developed country, that being the United States, of where I'm based in California currently.
Oh, excellent. And of course, your career has been quite interesting. Since you moved on from the Center for Risk Analysis, you worked in the capital markets, so you were doing a lot of primary research into what moves markets, what drives economic relations. And now you're, of course, working together with France Grenier at France Grenier Private Clients. So what kind of work are you doing with France?
The kind of work that I'm doing with France is advisory services for private companies that range from across different sectors, be it that of manufacturing, agriculture. It's essentially a company that wants to understand what are the broader trends happening here in South Africa, but as well as around the world. And a lot of my interest as well has been much aligned to that, is that I wanted to become a full-rounded economist, understanding capital markets, but understanding government policy and understanding the daily risks and opportunities, mostly, that companies face operating in South Africa as well as around the world. So that's the type of work that we do at France Grenier Private Clients. We advise firms on what's happening in the country, we analyze policy, and we also flag opportunities as well as that of risks.
Okay. So, I mean, ultimately, economics is really about the study of human behavior.
Yeah.
What drives people to exchange value with one another? What are the incentives in place that promote economic vitality? And so, yeah, I think as policy analysts, we can sometimes get caught up in the domain of government policy, but it's not governments that create economies. It's human beings like us having interactions at a micro level on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's just people going about their daily lives. It's like whether you are someone earning an income through having employment, or you're someone on the street selling amakwi, which are fat cakes. Like you are participating in human interaction, in trade. And out of that, you get an income to sustain yourself or that of your family. You create prosperity through that when allowing people to trade amongst each other. Understanding the government policy you understand suddenly the rules and regulations that govern that exchange, but mostly the progress of human beings come from that interaction, be it that from a micro level, or be it that from a multi-corporational company.
And we're very fortunate, obviously, to take advantage of this very brief window of opportunity whilst you come back and spend a month or so here in South Africa before you return to California. So what have been some of your impressions coming back, obviously through your lens as an economist, but also as a South African? I know from the time that I've spent abroad, that gives you a bit of perspective on some of the debates that we have here around politics, around economic interactions, economic life. What have been some of your reflections from all the way over there on the other side of the world in California and now coming back?
Yeah, I can say it's a completely different world. From the time I landed, I saw big highways, big trucks. Regular is our large. Everything is big there in America.
Yeah.
And that speaks to the quantum of capital investment that you see there in the US. It's just a developed country where most people have jobs, and there's actually restaurants where I am in Orange County, California, opening up and hiring young individuals. Seeing that level of development when I was there actually gave me a lot of hope, because in my mind, I was like, this is the same thing that South Africa could afford. Because when I was young, growing up in some parts of Pretoria, as well as some parts in the East Rand, my mother would take me to see these beautiful neighborhoods. And to explain them, those beautiful neighborhoods would be in a small radius, whereas there in America, it's as far as the eye can see. And in my mind, I was like, we can achieve this level of progress and development if we take what they did correctly and apply it here in South Africa. I think we can lift the lives of millions of South Africans. So actually studying there overseas, I always had it in mind that I'm coming back because I was seeing the successes that they had and I just wanted to bring it back home. So I was uplifted seeing so many people have access to resources from a young age, seeing people have jobs as well as having an income to support themselves and having quality healthcare and education. I saw that and I was like, this is what my country in some parts is and could also be for a lot of South Africans.
And what do you think that recipe for success is?
Fundamentally, it's policy. You can't escape that. It's the policies that the country implements. Your policies determine the level of economic growth that happens in your country. We spoke about sort of the micro level of interaction between individuals. If your policy inhibits that trade amongst those individuals, at a broader scale inhibits other trades and as well as investment into the country. What South Africa has suffered from is that our policies over the past decade has led to the country seeing investment levels decline and for an economy to struggle to grow past 1% and to have our current unemployment level of above 30%. The policies that's applied in America are very sound and sensible. Sure, there's federalism, different states compete for certain laws. You can see this happening with the competition between California and Texas, for example. But that's good. You can compete or by regulation and by laws to attract investment levels. In South Africa, we've actually been doubling down on policies that have been inhibiting that level of progress into the country. And that's the fundamental issue that we're currently facing.
Could you unpack that a little bit further for our audience? What are the policy missteps that South Africa has been making in your view? I mean, we all know about the sky-high unemployment and the low economic growth, but I think some people will disagree about why it is that we have those problems. Well, what's your assessment?
Yeah, I mean, these problems, they come and they show themselves in different issues. Currently, the most topical theme is South African and American relationships currently, which are deteriorating. And fundamentally underpinning that decline in bilateral relations with the US has been that of BEE and expropriation or compensation. From a global scale, it is what's been holding South Africa back, but as well as domestic policy. When actually looking at these policies, such as that of Black economic empowerment, some of the analysis around Black economic empowerment is that it was meant to lift the previously at disadvantage into the country, in uplifting them from being disadvantaged into that of being established middle income class individuals. And some of the thinking around mainstream analysis has been without BEE, we wouldn't have a Black middle income class, which I think is false. So the country has seen a success and upliftment in the Black middle income class individuals. And those people got to be in that position because they were very skilled. They got educated, they had opportunities which they took full advantage of, which landed them to be employed. But what has been the consequence of BEE has been certain individuals that have benefited. And at a broader scale, South Africa's investment levels, which from other countries, including the US, which is the point that they've made, is that BEE is a form of taxation on the commitment of capital investment into the country. It's not only the Americans that are saying that, but every other country around the world. And we can see that by actually looking at South Africa's fixed investment levels, which as a proportion, as the size of our economy, sits at about 15%. But what's normal in other emerging markets is about 25% to 30% of their respective economies.
And when you talk about fixed investment, that's distinct from capital flows, like portfolio flows, hot money that comes in and out. This is factories or mines, long-term investments, fixed capital formation, essentially.
Yeah, it's the commitment by businesses actually taking their money out of banks, investing it in their manufacturing plants or their office spaces in order to expand and employ more people. Out of that, you have business activity that lifts. You have the number of people that are employed that lifts as well, and you have an economy that grows. In the absence of that fundamental gauge, you have an economy that struggles to grow. If you don't attract that investment through your policy, which at the moment have been detrimental to investment levels in the country, the consequences of what the country sees currently. That's the first point. The second point, which has held South Africa back, has been that of expropriation or compensation. In that this is not a land issue that the country is facing. There's a lot of analysis that states that this is the demand for land by ordinary South Africans. South Africans, you see the polling numbers. We also pull them from the Social Research Foundation, of which I sit on the board of the Social Research Foundation, chaired by Frans Cronje, is that when you actually poll South Africans, most important issue that comes front and center is that of economic growth and jobs. Such things of redistributive policies are at the bottom of the list of the top 10 priority of ordinary South Africans. In that, what we're seeing in the expropriation or compensation is actually the ability of the government to expropriate fixed and immovable assets from private individuals in the country. Private individuals, meaning ordinary South Africans, whether black or white, be it farmer or commercial business, where your property is exposed to being expropriated. And fundamentally, any pillar of successful democracy, of a successful society, is fundamentally underpinned by property rights. If you devalue those by allowing expropriation below market value, which is what the Expropriation Act does, you fundamentally undermine that of market values of companies, as well as that of exchange to actually take place, and for that of a prosperous nation.
So Section 25 of the Constitution states that any expropriation must be just and equitable in terms of the compensation that you receive. And your argument, as far as I understand, is market-related compensation is a just and equitable.
Yeah, it's a just and equitable. Any kind of free and fair society, when you're saying just and equitable, you're saying you're making someone whole that you expropriate, that the property you've expropriated from. You don't leave them in a deep rut. That is what defines just and fair. And I think that's what every society has. Every other country has expropriation clauses, but they explicitly state at market value, which I think is what the Constitution also allows.
Yeah, and in the United States, something like eminent domain, there is this provision for the state to expropriate, but there's an understanding that this is a last resort measure, that it's an extraordinary measure, and that there needs to be sufficient compensation to the person who's been deprived of their property right. And,
exactly.
You know, South Africa really is in a very weak position in terms of our foreign policy and our attractiveness as an investment destination. So that's only going to exacerbate some of the concerns that prospective investors are going to have when they're wanting to make those long-term investments and commitments. They're not going to have the certainty that they require to be able to commit large amounts of capital to this country.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's fundamentally the reason why we've seen investment levels since 2007 decline until present. It's because of that certainty. They don't have that certainty that from a policy perspective, I can operate in South Africa for the next 10 to 20 years. That's the realm that entrepreneurs and business owners engage with. They look at the long-term trends. And if you make the line or sort of the waters murky for them, they look elsewhere and they invest in other markets. And that's exactly what's been going on, is that instead of the funds coming into South Africa, they've been going in other emerging markets, which are currently growing at about 4%, while South Africa, according to our numbers, is at sub 1%.
Okay. So can we just take a step back? You mentioned BEE and how this acts as a deterrent to potential foreign investors. I think you said it's almost like a tax.
Yes.
On inward investment. But this is dressed up as an historically just thing to do, that the state needs to come in and compel capital to be more equitable. I'm using their language. And you know, we at the Free Market Foundation have done extensive research. We recently published this costs of compliance with B-BBEE report, which has gotten a lot of media attention. And the researchers who authored the report, and we did this together with Solidarity Research Institute, they estimated that the costs to South Africa's GDP per annum is anywhere between 145 billion and 290 billion rand. This is actually quite a conservative estimate. It's a big range, obviously, just because of the methodological constraints of conducting this research. But what I think is striking about this research is really the first significant attempt to really try to quantify the costs of BEE. And I think this also speaks to the fact that BEE is this kind of holy cow, that you're not supposed to question it. No matter what the cost is or the burden is on the economy, you must just accept it because this is supposedly the just thing to do. What are your thoughts on the costs of BEE?
I think the costs of it are, we can see it right now over the past 17 years. Is that it has actually locked out millions of South Africans from actually being employed by derailing the growth rate. In that we've started this by stating, actually, if a multi-corporate wants to invest into South Africa, they need to give a certain percentage of their board to BEE criteria, and most firms are not willing to do that, rightfully so. If you're a company that you've spent many years developing your firm with the strategy and the risks involved, you're not going to give a certain portion of that to someone that was involved in the strategic planning of your company. And the consequence of that is that those firms haven't been investing in South Africa, or they find other ways, or they go to other emerging markets, for example, even here in Africa. And there's been an enormous amount of cost of that of BEE. In that, if we address and let's tackle that point that you said there, that we need to actually uplift previously disadvantaged individuals, which I do agree. And the form of transformation that we do it on two fronts. We can have empowerment policies, but the way in which South Africa's empowerment policies have been implemented have actually been to the detrimental of those people that we're trying to help. And by the analysis, when we worked together a few years ago, David, Anthea Jeffrey, the key, most important theme that I took from her is that you don't judge a policy by its intentions, but by its outcomes. The outcomes of BEE has been the situation where the country is right now, where the unemployment rate sits about 33.2%, and youth unemployment rate being above 60%. And a lot of those individuals benefiting from BEE, even according to polling data that we also have been that of politically connected and not for the betterment of ordinary South Africans. Real transformation is actually growing the economy and allowing those people, those millions of individuals that are currently unemployed, to be absorbed into the economy and to be absorbed into that of the middle income classes. We don't get that through more BEE. I don't think that's how it is done right now in the country, given the cost that's involved, given also the unseen costs of that of BEE being that of divergence of capital investment into the country. So I don't think it's been a huge detrimental cost into South Africa, and we need better policies.
Yeah, so I mean, Henry Hazlitt, the free market here, writing in the middle of the 20th century, he spoke about the seen versus the unseen consequences of your policy choices. So we might know of specific instances in which a firm in South Africa, a foreign national firm, is saying, we can't operate here, so we are going to leave. That's a seen effect. But you don't see all of the unseen opportunity cost of the hundreds of firms that have just silently passed by South Africa, who've decided to invest in Turkey or Brazil or Indonesia or wherever the case may be.
Yeah, exactly. Let's also bring this to what's happening in South Africa. The Americans right now, they're saying to South Africa, we want to do a deal to the scale that would lift your GDP growth rate close to 5%. What does a 5% GDP growth rate mean? For every 1% increase or decrease in the performance of the economy, you're either adding about 100,000 people into the employment category, or you're taking about 100,000 people away from the employment category into the unemployed category. Over the past 10 years, let's be more favorable, starting from 2018 until present, the country has only been adding about 70,000 jobs each and every year in an economy that's been growing at about sub 1%. Let's pull back the lens and compare that to the time in which the country was growing at about 4% from the period 1999 until 2007. We were creating about 530,000 jobs each and every year. Those are net new jobs.
And there was a lot of talk at the time of so-called jobless growth. And I think that was from opponents of free market economics who wanted to deride growth and wanted more state-led development.
Instead, we saw more jobs, and we saw most of those jobs coming from those previously disadvantaged individuals. Before that, before a free and fair country, before South Africa became a democracy, you were restricted according to your race where you could work, and you were restricted according to your wages as well. Once South Africa became a democracy, what we actually saw was a lot of Black individuals availing themselves for employment. You can also see this in the data, for example, where the Black participation rate rose from 1994 until to that of the 2000. And there's a consequence that if you have more people availing themselves for employment, that's a good thing. They're seeing opportunity. And there was a lot of opportunity. And if you have a lot of people availing themselves to employment, the calculation of unemployment therefore also rises, because now you suddenly have a bigger pool than you once had. And the consequence of that is that South Africa's unemployment rate, the rate itself, increased, but then it began to decline once those apartheid distortions, which we've called them, withered out of the employment numbers. And what we saw was actually the number of people doubling from 1994 of about 8 million, close to that of 2007, which was nearly 16 million people that were employed into the
Taking into account also population growth, obviously, but
Exactly.
proportionately employment rose.
Proportionally, employment rose. We did not see this in employment. We saw this in basic service delivery. For every one formal shack, for every one informal shack, there were 10 formal houses that were built. Electrification in the country, for example, declined from 50% of a proportion of South Africans without having electricity down to 20% in 2007. That was implemented again through the right policies that we've seen in that period, which we're currently not implementing. The consequence of that is what we find ourselves in today, where GDP per capita, the size of the economy divided by its population, is even lower than what it was in 2008. That means for your average household, if you were living in 2008, your life, your quality of life was much better than what it was currently. And that's accounting for population growth. But had we maintained those same growth levels, which we can maintain by having a deal with the Americans, by having a deal as well domestically, maintaining that 4% GDP growth rate until the present, what we would see is that that GDP per capita number would actually be about 56,000 rands higher per person than where it currently is.
Wow.
For a lot of businesses, that means that you're seeing double your client base. You're seeing double the cars on your highways. You're seeing families that are struggling to make ends meet and joining the ranks of the upper middle income class society, a growing one at that.
Right. Well, let's explore this relationship with the United States, because it doesn't seem to be functioning very well at the moment. And I think my assessment is that that's because of some of the missteps that the South Africans have been making, not only in the diplomatic relationship itself, but also in terms of our own domestic policy choices, like you've highlighted. So why would the Americans care about what's happening here down in the southern tip of Africa? What's in it for them? Why do they want to do a deal with South Africa, and what are they hoping to achieve?
There's a lot of opportunity in Africa, and more broadly, if you also look at other African countries. Out of the top 10 fastest growing economies this year, 5 of them are in Africa. Africa, median age is about 19. In Europe, it's about 44. In America, it's about 35. That means you have a large pool of productive individuals into the country. And per million of cities in Africa, compared to that to America and Europe, there's more per million cities in Africa than the America and the Europe combined. So there's a lot of opportunity into Africa. And if you can think about it as a market share, a lot of that chunk of market share has been taken up by China. America sees that, and they want to also invest into Africa and not be trailed behind, which has been a trend that they've been seeing over the past 10 years. Another important thing, particularly with South Africa, is that if you were to look at the shipping vessels passing the Cape of Good Hope, that volume is 3 times higher than what was passing the Suez Canal in October 2023. And out of that, there's a lot of opportunity for high economic progress into the country, as well as that investment into South Africa. But for the Americans, they see the geostrategic alignment as well as the economics as the same. From their prospect, the current trajectory of South Africa is that in the fullness of time, in about 20 years, with your current unemployment rate, with your current GDP growth numbers, you're a country that's at risk of actually capitulating to high levels of violence, as well as your civil institutions decaying. And in order for us to reverse from that trajectory, what they're saying is that we want to do a deal with you, but in order for us to actually do a deal with you, there are concessions that need to be done. We've spoken about BE, we've spoken about expropriation or compensation. But the second leg of that being the alignment that South Africa is doing in terms of aligning itself with countries that America views as a national security threat, that being of Iran, for example. We're taking on strategic blunders. And the consequence of that is that we're not seeing the investment needed for this country to actually grow.
Yes, and you and I were very fortunate to visit Israel in May 2024. And I would say South Africa's hostility towards Israel is like a red rag to a bull in terms of its relationship with the United States. That encounter between Presidents Trump and Ramaphosa in the Oval Office, they didn't mention the Israel issue, but I'm sure behind closed doors there is some tension around that.
Yeah, most definitely. I think what has happened is that South Africa has a lot of eyes on it. We see this particularly in America, be that with the US and South Africa Bilateral Trades Act happening with the committee, but now being passed or needs to be passed into the House, which would allow America to sanction key individuals within the ANC government, as well as other as institutions in the country. That's another important thing that needs to be noted. Another one is these tariffs. South Africa, with 2 weeks ago, when the White House released the number of countries that are facing tariffs, which were above the 10% baseline, which means there's a problem. Out of those 71 countries, South Africa is number 10 of the countries facing the higher level of tariffs. We're higher than our sub-Saharan African countries at 30%, Zimbabwe being at 15%, other countries as well, being that of Angola being at 15%, which means specifically South Africa has done something to actually have America looking at it. And one of those points has been what we've done at the ICJ. Another point of that is what we're doing now with closely aligning ourselves with Iran, a partner of which we don't have a strategic advantage of actually aligning ourselves with. Americans,
or even an economic relationship.
Even an economic relationship. When the Americans are saying to South Africa, we're willing to invest in your coal fleets, enough to the point of which, just on the energy perspective alone, if we refit our coal stations around the country, that is enough to lift South Africa's GDP growth level from 1% to 2%. Fixed BEE and expropriation recently go from 2% approaching that of 5%. And the difference of that, if we can extrapolate that over the next 10 years, it means an unemployment rate coming down from above 30% down towards 10%. That's actually what's on the table currently. But for that to be a successful prospect to be materialized, so the South Africans, which have been having a different conversation to what the Americans have been talking about, which on the South African side has been that of a such or that of a smaller scale than what the Americans think about. On the South African side being that of pork, being that of chicken, or that of blueberries. But on the American side, they're thinking much that of a higher level. And in order for those conversations to meet, the prospect of actually South Africa moving from a 30% down to a 10% is very slim, until from the South African side, the politicians actually take it serious to actually come to the table and negotiate with Americans and make those concessions.
So as free marketeers, we are very skeptical of tariffs, but I think our response to these actions by the Trump administration in terms of tariffs should be to unilaterally lower our own tariffs. As a show of good faith and also as a way of benefiting our own economy, because that would give us access to cheap products from abroad and introduce much more competitiveness into our own economy. But I guess, Bheki, the question that I would have for you is, some of these things, they seem so obvious. Yes, we should do away with BEE and the expropriation act should be canned. We should normalize our relations with the United States. But these things are not happening. And my contention is that there are political reasons for these not happening. What is your analysis before we close off?
I think you are absolutely spot on there, in that if we look at the policy objectives currently, let's look at that of the ANC. What prevents the ANC from actually doing those sensible actions has been the executive board. People that engage in private industry have an executive board in their companies. The executive board is responsible for the strategic planning of that business, and the success or failure of that is attributed to the board members. Within the ANC, their board members is the NEC, which is about 80 members. And out of them, they have vast varying degrees of interest, which are spread across from high levels of criminality to their own self-interests. And that is what prevents South Africa from actually moving on firm decisions. And on top of that, we have a president that's simply not willing to actually make those firm decisions and actually have control over his own board. It's the unwillingness to actually take the firm decisions that will lift the prospects of the country. And I think that's what we're seeing.
Well, we can wait for a very long time for the government to reform of its own accord. But in the absence of firm pressure from civil society and the public at large, that's not going to happen. That's why we do what we do here at the Free Market Foundation, creating that pressure for change, because the change is not going to come from within the political class voluntarily. It has to come from without. But Bheki Mahlobo, I wanted to thank you very much for this conversation and also for the work that you're doing. Good luck with the rest of your studies, and we hope to see you back here in South Africa contributing to positive change in the near future.
David, thank you so much for having me on. I hope to be back on again.
Thanks for watching this conversation with Bheki Mahlobo. Do remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. My name is David Ansara. This is the Free Market Foundation. Remember, stay free.